I never thought I'd be fighting for my own home, but here I am. Rebecca Adams sat in the dimly lit living room, her fingers clutching the envelope that had just arrived. The weight of it felt heavier than anything she'd ever had to carry before. This wasn't just an ordinary letter. This was a battle for everything she had left after the sudden death of her husband, John. And to make matters worse, it wasn't just the house on the line. It was her dignity, her family's legacy, and the sense of control that had always been taken from her. The funeral had barely ended. She had barely had time to process the pain of losing her partner of 15 years when her in-laws showed up, uninvited, with a demand, "Get out." They wanted the house. The house that John and Rebecca had built their lives in. The house where they had raised their children. They insisted it wasn't hers. After all, John had no will. And so, to them it was theirs. Her mind raced as she stared at the envelope, the words in bold. Asterisk, notice of eviction. Asterisk, she knew exactly what it meant, but that didn't make it any easier. The anger that had been building since the moment they arrived at her doorstep was starting to bubble over. It wasn't just about the house, it wasn't just about property, it was about respect. And for the first time in her life, Rebecca wasn't going to let someone take something from her without a fight. The tears were still fresh, her grief still raw, but as she sat in that room, Rebecca felt a fire ignite inside her. She wasn't going to let them have her home, not without a fight. Not after everything she had gone through. Not after everything her husband had worked for. She knew what they were trying to do. They were playing on her grief, using it to force her into submission. But this time she wouldn't fall for it. She had spent her life making sure everyone else was okay, making sure her family and friends were taken care of, all while her own needs were left behind. And now it was time for her to stop being the one who gave and gave without getting anything in return. The first thing she had to do was figure out exactly what she was up against. The house had been bought years ago, right after John and Rebecca had gotten married. The mortgage had been paid off together, every inch of the home a testament to their joint effort. But as she sat there, staring at the eviction notice, she realized she didn't even know if the house was officially in both of their names. She never bothered to check. She had trusted John completely, never imagining that something like this could happen. And yet, here she was facing the very real possibility that her in-laws would take everything from her, including the one thing that meant the most, the place where she had built a life with her husband. But she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Rebecca had always been strong. She had to be. It had been a constant in her life, especially when it came to her relationship with the Coopers, her in-laws. From the very beginning, they had never accepted her, never fully embraced her as part of the family. It wasn't as if they outright disliked her, they were just indifferent. But that indifference turned into something much worse after John's death. They hadn't even given her time to grieve before they started trying to take what was hers. Rebecca wasn't sure if she was angrier at them or at herself for not seeing it coming sooner. She knew that her husband had always kept things from her, especially when it came to finances. John was the kind of man who believed in protecting his family from unnecessary stress. He was a good man, a loving man, but he also had his secrets. And now those secrets were coming back to haunt her. As Rebecca sat in the stillness of the living room, the house now feeling foreign to her, she began to put the pieces together. She knew she had to act fast. The Coopers wouldn't wait around. They'd already made their move, and now it was time for her to make hers. But what could she do? She wasn't a lawyer, she wasn't a financial expert, and she wasn't prepared for a fight like this. She'd spent so many years focusing on everyone else that she had never learned how to stand up for herself. But now, in the face of this injustice, Rebecca realized that she had no choice. She had to learn. The first thing she needed was information. She needed to find out if the house was legally in both of their names. She needed to know what she was fighting for. But where would she start? She wasn't sure who to turn to. She couldn't talk to John anymore. He was gone. And even if he had left her some sort of legal protection, the thought of going through his things felt like an intrusion. But the situation was desperate, and Rebecca couldn't let that stop her. She had to know what she was up against. As she began searching through the papers in John's office, her heart sank. The papers were scattered and disorganized. It was like looking through 1,000 jumbled pieces of a puzzle, each one representing a moment of her life that she had never questioned. It was painful, but she had no choice. She had to find out if she had any claim to this house, this life, this future. And then, buried beneath a pile of paperwork, she found it. The deed. The deed to the house was in her name. The realization hit her like a wave. John had left it all to her. She didn't know if it was because he foresaw this moment, or if it was just a matter of trust. But the deed was hers. The house, the life she had built with John, was legally hers. She couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened, after feeling like she was losing everything, this one document gave her the power to fight back. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She was a woman with the legal right to keep her home, to protect her memories, and to stand up to her in-laws who had tried to take it all away. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear. She wasn't going to lose. Not without a fight. She took the deed, walked out of the room, and looked around the house one last time. It was her home, and she was going to keep it. This was only the beginning. Rebecca sat in the quiet living room, the deed still clutched in her hand, her mind racing. She had been through so much in the past few days, and yet she felt like she had just scratched the surface. The emotions from the funeral, the overwhelming grief of losing. John still loomed over her. But now there was something else, something much heavier. The house, their home, was hers. It was legally hers. She kept staring at the piece of paper in her hand, not entirely sure what to do next. The Coopers hadn't expected this, and neither had she. They thought they had the upper hand, that they could simply walk in and take control. But now she knew she had the power to fight back. The realization didn't bring immediate relief, though. It only brought more questions, more doubts. How would she deal with her in-laws? How would she protect this home from the people who had always made her feel like an outsider? Rebecca couldn't ignore the years of tension that had built up between her and the Coopers. The passive-aggressive remarks, the moments where they made her feel small or unimportant, all of that was still fresh in her mind. They never accepted her fully, and now they were trying to take everything away from her. She didn't want to fight them, didn't want to turn her grief into a battle over property, but what choice did she have? This wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers, about standing up for herself after years of being dismissed. The weight of that responsibility was enormous. She wasn't sure she was ready for this fight, but she knew there was no turning back. Rebecca stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the neighborhood. The house looked the same, but everything had changed. The peaceful, comforting place she had shared with John now felt like a fortress she had to defend. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. She didn't need to look to know it was the Coopers. They hadn't given up, and they wouldn't back down without a fight. Rebecca turned away from the window and sat back down on the couch. She had to prepare for what was coming next. She had to gather her strength and decide how to move forward. The first thing she needed was a plan. She couldn't just sit here and wait for them to come to her. She needed to take control of the situation, and the best way to do that was through legal action. Rebecca reached for her phone and dialed the number of the lawyer she had met with earlier in the week. She needed to make sure she understood her rights and the next steps in the process. The phone rang 3 times before Diane, her lawyer, picked up. "Hello, Rebecca." Diane's voice came through, calm and professional. Asterisk, "How are you holding up?" Asterisk, "I'm ready," Rebecca said, her voice steadier than she felt. Asterisk, "I found the deed. It's in my name. I want to move forward with this." Asterisk, "That's great," Diane responded. Asterisk, "Now we can start putting together a plan. The first thing you need to do is ensure that you have all the supporting documents. We'll need to present everything in court, and we want to make sure we're prepared for anything they might throw at us." Asterisk, Rebecca nodded, even though Diane couldn't see her. Asterisk, "I've got everything. I'll send it to you." Asterisk, "Perfect," Diane said. Asterisk, "We'll get the process started right away. It won't be quick, but we'll make sure you're protected. You're doing the right thing." Asterisk, the conversation ended, but Rebecca was still left with the weight of the next steps ahead of her. She wasn't sure if she was strong enough for this fight, but she had no choice. She had to be. She couldn't let them take her home, take her memories, and let everything John had worked for slip away. As the hours passed, Rebecca spent the rest of the day sorting through every piece of documentation she could find. She searched through the papers John had left behind, sifting through old files and receipts. She felt like she was walking through his life, reliving the moments they had shared, but now everything felt tainted. The Coopers had no right to take this from her. By the time night fell, Rebecca had a small stack of papers prepared for her lawyer. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As she stood up and stretched, she felt a sense of exhaustion settling in. The fight ahead wasn't just about legalities. It was about everything she had lost and everything she was willing to fight for. She wasn't just fighting for property. She was fighting for her own sense of belonging, for her right to hold on to the life she had built with John. But the fight would be long. She knew that. The Coopers wouldn't give up easily. They would use everything they had to try and take control, but Rebecca wasn't about to let that happen. As she lay down that night, the weight of it all still hung heavily on her, but there was a flicker of resolve deep inside her. She had made her decision. She was going to fight. The next day, she would send the documents to Diane and begin the legal process. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The house was hers. And so was her future. Rebecca spent the next few days wrapped in the overwhelming tasks ahead of her. The grief from John's passing still weighed heavily on her heart, but the realization that her in-laws had no right to the house had begun to settle into her mind. She had gone from feeling helpless and vulnerable to a woman determined to protect everything she had left. She had gathered the evidence, and now it was time to prepare for the next steps. Her lawyer Diane had explained the process, but the unknown still loomed large. Would the Coopers challenge the deed? Would they try to outlast her in a long legal battle? Rebecca didn't know, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to back down. The house was hers and she would fight to keep it. As the days passed, Rebecca found herself spending hours on the phone with Diane, organizing the legal paperwork, and going through every detail of her case. Diane was thorough, guiding her step by step through the process, but Rebecca could sense the tension between them. The Coopers were going to fight dirty. She could feel it. They had always been that way, manipulative and controlling, always trying to push her out of the picture. Rebecca had never been confrontational, always the peacekeeper, the one who gave in to avoid conflict. But now, with everything on the line, she knew she had to change. She had to become the fighter she had never allowed herself to be. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming her voice, her dignity, and standing up for herself after years of being overlooked. It wasn't easy, but Rebecca was determined to press on. She had no other choice. One afternoon, as Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, going over her documents for what felt like the 100th time, the phone rang. It was Diane. Rebecca, I need to talk to you about the next steps. The Coopers have already hired a lawyer, and they're prepared to contest the deed. They'll try to argue that it wasn't legally binding, that it was a mistake, but we need to be ready for anything. Rebecca swallowed hard, the weight of the news sinking in. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing it from Diane made it all the more real. I'm ready, Rebecca said, her voice steady but tinged with the exhaustion she was feeling. I don't care what they say. The house is mine. I'm not giving it up. Good, Diane replied. We'll start by filing the formal complaint. I'll send you the documents. This is going to take time, but we'll build a strong case. Rebecca nodded, even though Diane couldn't see her. I just want this to be over, she muttered, the weariness creeping into her words. I just want to be left alone to grieve, but they won't let me. They keep pushing. That's exactly why you need to stand your ground, Diane said gently. You can't let them walk all over you anymore. This is about more than just property. It's about protecting what's yours, about getting the respect you deserve. Rebecca felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Diane was right. This wasn't just about a house. It was about her right to exist in the family, her right to have control over her own life. She couldn't keep letting them dictate everything. I'll do whatever it takes, Rebecca said, her voice firm now, the resolve in her tone clear. I won't let them take this from me. We'll get through this, Diane assured her. You're stronger than you think. As the call ended, Rebecca sat back in her chair, the weight of it all sinking in. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this battle, but she had no choice. She had to be. The Coopers weren't going to back down, and neither would she. It was a war now, not just for the house but for her future. Rebecca had always been the one to take the high road, the one to avoid conflict at all costs. But now, conflict had found her, and she wasn't going to run from it. She would face it head on. The next few days blurred together as Rebecca worked tirelessly sorting through documents, preparing for the legal battle, and pushing through the emotional weight of it all. It was hard to stay focused, especially with the house still feeling like an empty shell of what it used to be. Every room was filled with memories of John, good memories, painful memories. Every corner of the house reminded her of the life they had built together, and now it felt like the Coopers were trying to take that away from her. But she wasn't going to let them. As Rebecca sat down with her lawyer once again, she could feel the change in herself. She had spent so many years being the one who did what was expected of her, who kept the peace and made sacrifices for everyone else. But now she was finally ready to stand up for herself. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was prepared for the fight ahead. The Coopers had underestimated her. They thought they could bully her into submission, but Rebecca was about to prove them wrong. She was ready to take control of her life again. The first legal step was filed, and the Coopers were notified that Rebecca wasn't backing down. The battle had officially begun, and Rebecca was no longer the passive wife she had once been. She was a woman standing tall, ready to reclaim what was rightfully hers. And she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. As the days turned into weeks, Rebecca found herself immersed in the process. The stress, the paperwork, the constant back and forth with her lawyer. It all became overwhelming at times, but she pushed through. She had no choice. This was her life now. The Coopers were relentless, their lawyer trying every trick in the book to discredit her and undermine her claim. But with every attack, Rebecca grew stronger. She wasn't going to let them win. With every step forward, she felt herself growing more confident. The legal battle was far from over, but she was no longer the woman who had sat quietly in the background, allowing others to take control of her future. She was in charge now, and she was going to fight for what was hers no matter what it took. Rebecca stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blazer as she prepared for the day ahead. The light filtering through the blinds cast a soft glow on her face, but there was no warmth in the moment. She had become used to this routine, the daily struggle to maintain composure, to push down the swelling tide of grief and frustration. The legal battle with her in-laws was no longer just a battle for property. It had become a war for her own sense of identity, for her right to exist in this family as something more than just an outsider. The past few weeks had been a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and late-night strategy sessions with Diane. Every day, Rebecca felt herself getting stronger, more confident in the steps she was taking. But with each new revelation, the emotional toll was becoming heavier. The Coopers had refused to let her go, continuing to contest the deed, throwing every possible obstacle in her path. She had expected their hostility, but it was becoming clearer that this wasn't just about the house. It was about control, about making sure that Rebecca would never truly belong in the family. She had never been fully accepted by them. But now, after John's death, their true colors were showing. They saw her as weak, as someone they could push around, someone who would just accept whatever they decided. But Rebecca was no longer that person. The house, the memories of her time with John, all of it was hers. She wasn't going to let them take that away. Rebecca took a deep breath as she left her bedroom, walking through the empty halls of the house. It felt so different now, like a place she no longer recognized. It was still the home she had shared with John, but now it felt like a battleground. She had already filed the formal complaint, but the Coopers were relentless. They had tried to bully her into submission, tried to manipulate her into giving up, but she had stood firm. And now she was preparing for the next step. Diane had arranged a meeting with the family's lawyer, and Rebecca had to face them again. She didn't know how long this would go on, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to back down. The Coopers were starting to realize that Rebecca wasn't the same woman they had once known. She wasn't going to be intimidated. She wasn't going to let them win. The confrontation with her in-laws was inevitable. She could already feel the tension building inside her as she made her way to the car, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She had never been one for confrontation, never the type to demand her space or fight for her voice. But now she was forced to. The legal process had changed her. It had made her realize that she was capable of standing up for herself. And she would do whatever it took to protect the life she had built with John. As she arrived at the law office, she could see the Coopers already waiting outside. Their presence made her stomach turn, but she didn't let it show. She took a deep breath and walked into the building with her head held high. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The Coopers were seated, their lawyer standing beside them, looking smug and confident. Diane greeted Rebecca and led her to the table. As Rebecca sat down, she could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. The Coopers exchanged glances, their eyes cold and calculating. They had no intention of letting this go easily. But Rebecca wasn't about to let them bully her into silence. The meeting began with a barrage of legal jargon, but Rebecca could barely focus on the words. Her mind was preoccupied with the realization that this was more than just a legal battle. It was a fight for her place in the world. For so long she had allowed others to dictate her life. She had let the Coopers push her around, let John's death become an excuse for them to treat her as if she didn't matter. But now things were different. She wasn't just a widow. She wasn't just a woman trying to pick up the pieces of her life. She was a person with rights, with a voice, and she wasn't going to be silenced anymore. As the lawyer presented the Coopers' case, Rebecca could feel the anger bubbling up inside her. She was so tired of their manipulation, so tired of their attempts to control her. But she remained calm, choosing her words carefully. When it was her turn to speak, Rebecca stood up, the room growing quiet in anticipation. "I'm not here to argue over money or property," she began, her voice steady but firm. I'm here to stand up for what's mine. The house is in my name and I won't let you take it away from me. The Coopers' lawyer sneered, but Rebecca didn't flinch. She had already made up her mind. This was her fight and she was ready for it. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of legal jargon and back-and-forth arguments. But Rebecca stayed focused, her eyes locked on the Coopers, her posture unwavering. She had done her research, she knew her rights, and she wasn't going to let them manipulate her any longer. As the meeting ended, the Coopers left the room without saying a word to Rebecca. Their silence spoke volumes. They knew they had underestimated her, and now they were starting to see that they wouldn't be able to push her around any longer. As Rebecca walked out of the building, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't over yet, but she had taken a major step forward. The Coopers weren't going to give up easily, but neither was she. The house, her home, was no longer just a symbol of the life she had with John. It was a symbol of her strength, her resolve, and her refusal to let anyone take what was rightfully hers. The battle was far from over, but Rebecca knew one thing for sure. She would fight until the end. She would not be silenced, and she would not back down. Not anymore. Rebecca woke up early the next morning, the sunlight barely peeking through the blinds. The house felt too quiet. She could hear the sound of her own breathing, her thoughts swirling in her head. It had been a restless night, the weight of the legal battle pressing down on her chest. She couldn't escape it. Not now. The house had once been her sanctuary, the place where she and John had dreamed of growing old together. But now it felt like a battlefield. Every inch of it was filled with memories, with pain, and with the constant reminder that her in-laws were trying to take it all from her. She had never imagined her life would come to this. The woman who had once been the quiet, compliant wife, the one who always did what was expected of her, was now standing up for what was hers, refusing to back down. It was a terrifying thought, but she knew she couldn't give in. Not this time. She couldn't let them win. She sat at the kitchen table, looking out the window at the neighborhood. The world outside seemed so peaceful, so normal, while inside her life had become anything but. She had spent the last few days gathering documents, researching her rights, and preparing for the next steps. It felt like she was slowly putting the pieces of her life back together. But it was exhausting. Every day the Coopers pushed harder, tried to manipulate her more, and she was getting tired of it. She wanted this to be over. She wanted to grieve, to heal, but the fight was far from over. The phone buzzed on the table, interrupting her thoughts. It was Diane, her lawyer. She picked it up and answered, her voice steady. Rebecca. How are you holding up? I'm getting through it, she replied, taking a deep breath. I just want this to be over. I'm ready to move forward. I know it's difficult, but we're getting closer to the end. The Coopers are pushing, but you've got this. We just need to stay focused. Rebecca felt a small flicker of reassurance. Diane's words were a reminder of how far she had come. She wasn't doing this alone. Diane had been by her side every step of the way, guiding her through the legal process, helping her understand what needed to be done. Rebecca had never felt more grateful for her support. I'm ready, Rebecca said, her voice firm now, filled with determination. I'm not going to let them take this from me. I won't back down. Good, Diane replied, her tone warm but focused. We'll file the next paperwork today. It's time to take the next step. Stay strong. You're doing the right thing. As they ended the call, Rebecca sat back in her chair, her mind racing with thoughts of what came next. The legal battle was far from over, but she had made it this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. Her husband's family had underestimated her. They thought they could push her around, guilt her into giving up, but they didn't know her. She was stronger than they realized, and she would fight for what was hers. The next day, Rebecca met with Diane at the law office to review the next steps. The office was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning. Rebecca sat across from Diane, her hands folded on the table, her eyes focused on the documents in front of her. The papers were filled with legal jargon, but Rebecca was learning. She was beginning to understand the intricacies of the situation, and that knowledge gave her the confidence she needed. We'll need to submit this to the court, Diane said, pointing to the document in front of her. Once we file, we'll wait for the hearing date. But in the meantime, you should be prepared for the Coopers to try and drag this out. They won't back down easily. I know, Rebecca replied, her voice steady. But I'm not going to let them win. Not this time. The conversation continued, with Diane outlining the steps they would take to build a strong case. Rebecca listened intently, making sure she understood every detail. This was her fight, and she needed to be fully prepared. As they wrapped up the meeting, Diane handed Rebecca a folder with all the necessary paperwork. Keep this safe, Diane instructed. We'll need everything we can get to make sure the Coopers don't try anything else. Rebecca nodded, tucking the folder under her arm as she left the office. The weight of the paperwork felt heavier now, but it was also a reminder that she was no longer passive in this battle. She had a plan. She had the law on her side, and she was ready to use it. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Rebecca spent hours preparing her case, going over every detail, making sure she had everything she needed. Her in-laws weren't giving up. They continued to pressure her, sending letters, making calls, trying to get her to back down. But Rebecca didn't budge. She couldn't. Every time she thought about giving up, about letting go of the fight, she remembered the house. She remembered what John had worked for. And she remembered what was at stake. As the days passed, Rebecca found herself becoming more and more immersed in the legal process. She was learning to speak the language of the court, to understand the legal jargon that had once seemed so foreign to her. It wasn't easy, but it was empowering. She wasn't the same woman she had been when this all started. She had changed. She had found her voice, and she was using it. And as she walked into court for the first hearing, Rebecca knew one thing for certain: she was ready. She wasn't going to let them take her home. Not now. Not ever. The court date had arrived, and Rebecca stood outside the courthouse, staring up at the imposing building. Her heart raced in her chest, but she tried to steady herself. She was no longer the woman who had quietly accepted everything life threw at her. She wasn't the passive wife she had been before, letting her in-laws manipulate and control her. She had fought for her place in this family, and today was the day it would all be decided. The Coopers were already inside, waiting for her. Rebecca had spent the past few weeks preparing for this moment, reviewing every document, every legal term, and every piece of evidence she had. Diane had guided her through the process, helping her understand what to expect, but nothing could prepare her for the weight of walking into that courtroom. She wasn't just fighting for a house. She was fighting for her dignity, for the life she had built with John, and for the future she had hoped to create. The doors to the courthouse opened, and Rebecca stepped inside. The air felt thick, the weight of the situation pressing on her. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway, and she couldn't help but feel the eyes of the other people in the building on her. It was as if the whole world was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. As she made her way into the courtroom, she saw the Coopers sitting on the other side of the room. They were already talking to their lawyer, their expressions cold and detached. It was as if they saw this as just another business transaction, not the fight for a home, a family, and a future. Rebecca sat down at the table across from them, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. This wasn't just a legal battle, this was personal. She had spent years being the dutiful daughter-in-law, trying to please everyone, keeping the peace, and sacrificing her own needs for the sake of the family. But now it was her turn to fight. The judge walked in and the room fell silent. Rebecca felt a shiver run down her spine as the proceedings began. The lawyer for the Cooper started speaking, his voice smooth and confident. He presented his case, trying to convince the judge that Rebecca had no legal claim to the house, that it belonged to the family, not her. But Rebecca knew better. She had the deed, and she had every right to be there. As the lawyer finished, it was Rebecca's turn. She took a deep breath and stood up, her hands shaking slightly, but she held her head high. She had been practicing her words for weeks, and now it was time to speak them. Your Honor, I stand here today not just to defend my home, but to defend my right to exist in this family. For years I've been made to feel like I don't matter, like I'm not entitled to anything. But this house is mine. My husband left it to me, and I will not let anyone take it from me. The words felt powerful as they left her lips. Rebecca had never been the one to speak out, to assert herself in front of others, but now she felt like she was finally finding her voice. The Cooper's lawyer looked at her with disdain, but Rebecca didn't flinch. She continued, I know the Coopers believe they have a right to this house, but they do not. My husband and I worked for this home, and he made sure that I would be taken care of even after he was gone. The deed is in my name, and that is the truth. I will fight for it, not because I want to be difficult, but because this is my home, and I will not let anyone take it from me. As Rebecca sat back down, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had spoken her truth, and for the first time, it felt like she wasn't just an outsider in her own life. She wasn't just the passive observer anymore. She was the one taking control. The Cooper's lawyer tried to counter her argument, throwing legal jargon at the judge, but Rebecca wasn't intimidated. She had already done her homework, and she knew the law. The judge listened carefully, nodding at times, and Rebecca could see the wheels turning in his head. After what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. I have heard both sides, and I will take all the evidence into consideration before making my decision. This will not be a quick process, but I assure you that I will carefully review everything before issuing a ruling. As the court session ended, Rebecca stood up, her legs feeling shaky beneath her. She had done everything she could. She had spoken up, and now it was out of her hands. She could only hope that the judge would see the truth and rule in her favor. The Coopers stood up as well, casting one last glance in her direction before they walked out of the room. Their cold stares did nothing to break her resolve. Rebecca had finally taken control of her life, and she wasn't about to let them take that away from her. As she left the courthouse, she felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The battle was far from over, but she had made it through the first step. She wasn't going to let them win. She wasn't going to back down. Not anymore. The weeks following the hearing were filled with a whirlwind of emotions and legal paperwork. Rebecca had done everything she could, but now it was out of her hands. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the Coopers' relentless attempts to undermine her. But each day she spent working with Diane, preparing for the next round, the more she realized just how far she had come. She was no longer the woman who had cowered in the background, too scared to stand up for herself. She had spoken in court, she had made her voice heard. And now she was waiting for the judge's decision. The silence from her in-laws continued, but Rebecca knew that wouldn't last long. They had tried to force her out once, but they weren't done yet. The phone calls came, the text messages filled with passive-aggressive remarks, and every time she saw one of their names on the screen, her stomach twisted. They were trying to wear her down, trying to make her feel isolated, but Rebecca refused to give in. The house was hers, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. One evening, as Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, her phone rang again. It was Diane. Rebecca, I need to talk to you. We've got some news from the court. Diane said, her voice serious but not without a hint of optimism. The judge has made a decision. Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for this moment. But now that it was here, she felt the weight of the uncertainty. What's the decision? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The judge has ruled in your favor, Diane said. Rebecca felt a rush of emotions hit her all at once. Relief, gratitude, but also disbelief. She hadn't expected this so soon. It felt like a dream, like everything she had been fighting for had finally come to fruition. You've won the house, Diane continued. The Coopers have no claim to it. The deed is legally yours, and the court recognizes your rights. For a moment, Rebecca didn't know what to say. She had expected to feel elation, but instead there was just a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had won, but the journey had taken so much out of her. Thank you, Diane, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I couldn't have done this without you. You did all the hard work, Diane replied. You stood your ground and that's why you won. The weight of the victory finally began to sink in. Rebecca wasn't just fighting for property. She was fighting for her place in her own life, for her dignity, for everything she had sacrificed in the name of family. She had been given the chance to reclaim what was hers, and she had taken it. The Coopers had tried to break her, but they had failed. They hadn't seen what she was capable of, and now they would have to accept it. The victory wasn't just about the house. It was about the respect she had earned. It was about standing up for herself when it would have been easier to let them walk all over her. But Rebecca had made the decision not to let them. She was no longer just a woman in the background of her own life. She was the one in control now. Rebecca stood up from the table, the weight of the phone call still heavy on her shoulders. She walked over to the window, looking out at the house that had been the center of her life for so many years. The home that John and she had built together. The home where she had hoped to grow old with him. It was hers now, and that fact filled her with a quiet pride. She wasn't just keeping a house. She was preserving the life she had worked so hard to build. As the days passed, Rebecca could feel the Coopers' presence growing smaller and smaller. They had tried to make her feel powerless, but now it was clear that they had no hold over her anymore. They would never understand what it had taken for her to stand up to them, to fight for what was hers. They had underestimated her. And now they had lost. The first few weeks of the victory were a mix of relief and exhaustion. Rebecca spent time settling into her new normal, going through the motions of everyday life. The weight of the fight had lifted, but she was still adjusting to the change. It wasn't just about the legal victory. It was about the realization that she had stood up for herself. She had taken control of her life, and nothing could take that away from her. But even in the quiet moments, she couldn't help but feel the absence of John. The house felt empty without him. His presence was everywhere. The scent of his favorite cologne lingering in the air. The photographs on the walls that told the story of their life together. But as she walked through the rooms, Rebecca began to realize that she wasn't alone. She had herself. And that was enough. One evening as she sat down with a glass of wine, she reflected on everything she had been through. The grief, the betrayal, the fight for the house. All of it had led her here to this moment of peace. She had fought for herself and she had won. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And she knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it. The house, the memories, the battles, it was all part of her story. And now Rebecca had the strength to write the next chapter on her own terms. Rebecca stood in the center of the living room, her eyes scanning the space she had once shared with John. The house was quieter than ever now, and the silence felt suffocating. She had won the legal battle, but victory had not brought the peace she had expected. The house was still full of his presence, his books on the shelves, his favorite chair in the corner, the photographs of their life together on the walls. It all felt so much like him and yet so empty. John's absence was a constant weight, pressing down on her chest. She had spent so many years giving so much of herself to her family, trying to make sure everyone else was happy. never once stopping to think about her own needs. But now she was alone. The fight for the house had given her back control, but it hadn't given her back what she truly wanted, peace. The house was hers, but the emotional scars of the past few months still lingered. It was hard to move forward when the past was so firmly anchored in every corner. Rebecca hadn't expected grief to feel like this, so heavy, so overwhelming. Every time she thought she had moved past it, something would remind her of John, and she would be pulled back into the sorrow. The memories were bittersweet, and sometimes they felt like too much to bear. She tried to push those thoughts away, reminding herself that she had won, that she had fought for what was hers. But there were still days when it felt like the weight of everything would crush her. She had always been the one to put on a brave face, to show strength when it was needed. But now there were moments when that strength felt like a mask, hiding the vulnerability beneath. The Coopers had tried to take everything from her, and they had failed. But the real challenge wasn't the house or the legal battle. It was the emptiness she felt inside. She had spent so many years fighting for others that she had forgotten how to fight for herself. Now it was time to relearn how to live for herself, to honor her own needs, to rebuild her life without the shadow of the past hanging over her. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The house was just a building, a structure filled with memories. But it was also a symbol of the life she had fought for with John, and now a symbol of the life she would continue on her own terms. It wasn't going to be easy to move on, but Rebecca was learning that moving on didn't mean forgetting. It meant honoring the past while building something new. She took a deep breath and walked over to the window, looking out at the garden. The sun was setting, casting a soft golden light over the yard. The flowers John had loved still blooming in the corners. She could almost see him there, tending to the garden, his voice in her ear, telling her how beautiful everything was. It hurt to think about it, but it also gave her a sense of peace. She would always carry John with her, but it was time to start living again. As she turned away from the window, Rebecca knew that she had a long road ahead of her. The legal battle might be over, but the emotional journey had just begun. It wasn't about finding closure or moving on quickly. It was about learning how to live fully, how to embrace the moments that still mattered, and how to find joy in the everyday. It was about allowing herself the space to grieve and the freedom to heal. It wasn't going to be a smooth path. There would be setbacks, days when the weight of it all seemed too much to carry. But Rebecca had already proven to herself that she could overcome anything. She had faced the Coopers and she had stood her ground. She had fought for her right to keep the house and she had won. Now it was time to fight for her own happiness. As the days passed, Rebecca began to find small moments of joy in her daily life. She started spending more time outside, taking walks through the garden, breathing in the fresh air. She began to reconnect with old friends, spending time with people who had always supported her. Slowly but surely, she was rebuilding the life that had once been interrupted by grief and loss. It was hard, but it was worth it. The house was hers and so was her future. She had the power to decide what came next. And for the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt like she was ready to embrace that power. She had fought for herself once and she would do it again. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And that was enough. As the days turned into weeks, Rebecca found herself beginning to settle into her new normal. The house was still the same, filled with memories of John, but it no longer felt like a battleground. The legal victory, though it had taken so much out of her, had given her the space to breathe. For the first time in months, she found herself waking up without the weight of anxiety pressing down on her. It wasn't that everything was suddenly perfect. It wasn't that the pain of losing John had disappeared. But she had reclaimed something important, her sense of control, her ability to make decisions that were right for her, and the knowledge that she had the strength to fight for herself. She had spent so much of her life trying to keep the peace, trying to fit into the mold that others had created for her. But now she was learning to live for herself. She was slowly discovering who she was outside of the roles that had been imposed on her. It wasn't easy. It wasn't an overnight transformation. Some days she still struggled to find her footing. The house, the memories, and the emotions were all still there, and they weighed on her more heavily than she had anticipated. But each day she moved forward. It was small steps, one after the other, but they added up. She found herself waking up in the mornings with a sense of purpose, The quiet joy of knowing that she had a life to rebuild. The quiet mornings were still hard. The house, though familiar, still felt empty without John. She missed him every day. But she was starting to make the space her own. Rebecca began to decorate the rooms in a way that felt right for her, filling the spaces with things that brought her comfort. She added photos of her friends, her family, things that reminded her of the world outside of the Coopers' influence. She started gardening again, something she and John had always enjoyed together. It was a way for her to connect with the love they had shared, but it was also a way for her to build something for herself. She took long walks in the neighborhood, just to clear her head, to reconnect with the world around her. She would visit the local coffee shop, where she had made a few new friends. She was slowly, cautiously rediscovering the simple joys of life. One afternoon, as she walked through the local park, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw that it was Diane. "Hi, Rebecca," Diane said, her voice calm but warm. I wanted to check in with you. How are you doing? I'm okay, Rebecca replied, her voice steady. She wasn't sure if she was entirely okay, but she knew that she was stronger than she had been before. I'm starting to get used to things. It's a slow process, but I'm getting there. That's good to hear, Diane said. I just wanted to remind you that the legal battle is still ongoing though. The Coopers might not be done yet. They're not giving up on trying to get the house back, and we need to be prepared. Rebecca sighed. She had known this wasn't over, but hearing it again made her stomach turn. I know, she said softly. I'm ready for whatever comes next, but I don't want to go through this forever. I just want peace. And you will get it, Diane reassured her. It's just going to take time. The most important thing is that you've established your right to stay in the house. You've already won the first battle. The rest will follow. Rebecca nodded, even though Diane couldn't see her. I just wish it didn't have to be this hard, she said quietly. I just want to live my life again, without the weight of all this hanging over me. I understand, Diane said sympathetically. But you're doing great. You're stronger than you think. This is all just a process. You've made it through the hardest part. Keep focusing on taking care of yourself, and we'll keep moving forward. Thanks, Diane, Rebecca said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She was grateful for Diane's support. I'll keep pushing through. As the call ended, Rebecca stood still for a moment in the park, looking out at the trees swaying in the breeze. She had fought for so long, and though the fight wasn't over, she was starting to feel the shift. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She had been through hell in the last few months, grief, betrayal, and a legal battle that had taken everything out of her. But now she was starting to find her way back. The Coopers hadn't broken her. They had tried, they had pushed, but she had held on. And now, as the weeks passed, Rebecca began to realize that the fight wasn't just about the house. It was about her reclaiming her life. The Coopers may have tried to take everything from her, but they hadn't taken her spirit. And as Rebecca walked home that afternoon, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't immediate. It didn't come in a rush. But it was there deep inside her. A quiet promise that she was going to be okay. She had survived. And she would keep going no matter what. Rebecca sat in her living room, the same room where everything had started. The battle for the house was behind her, and yet it still lingered in the air. The house had been quiet for weeks, but today, there was a calmness that felt different. She had won, and it should have been enough to bring peace, but as she looked around, she realized how much she had lost in the process. She had fought for the house, for what was hers, but there were still moments when the weight of everything made her feel as if she was carrying the world on her shoulders. She missed John more than ever. It wasn't just the house that had been theirs. It was the life they had built together. The memories echoed in every corner, in every room. His laughter, his presence, everything was gone now. Rebecca let out a deep sigh, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She had been through so much. The grief, the legal battle, the uncertainty. All of it had taken a toll on her. But now she was standing at a crossroads. She had won the house, but what did that victory really mean? The house was hers legally, but it didn't bring back the life she had lost. She still didn't know how to live without John. She didn't know how to move on. She spent the next few days in a haze going through the motions of life. She handled the house, took care of the small things, fixing broken appliances, tending to the garden, paying bills. It was routine, but it wasn't enough. The silence in the house was overwhelming, and no matter how many times she told herself she was fine, she wasn't. One afternoon, as Rebecca was sitting in the garden, staring at the flowers John had planted years ago, her phone rang. It was Diane.
Rebecca.
How are you holding up?
Asterisco asterisco a infine, asterisco Rebecca.
Replied, but her voice didn't sound convincing even to herself. Asterisk, just taking things day by day. Asterisk, I know it's been tough, Diane said, her voice sympathetic. Asterisk, but I wanted to check in with you. The Coopers haven't given up. They've hired a new lawyer, and they're planning to appeal the judge's decision. Asterisk. Rebecca felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had known it wasn't over, but hearing it confirmed made the weight of the situation hit her all over again. Asterisk, they're not going to stop, are they? Asterisk. Rebecca muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. No, they won't, Diane replied. Asterisk, but we're prepared. We'll keep fighting. I know it's exhausting, but this is what they do. They try to wear you down to make you give up. But you've come this far, and we won't let them take it from you. Asterisk. Rebecca stood up, walking through the garden, her mind racing with thoughts of the Coopers and the endless battle. The house was supposed to be her safe haven, her place to heal, but now it felt like a constant reminder of everything she was fighting to keep. I won't give up, Rebecca said firmly, her resolve returning. Asterisk, I won't let them take this from me. Not again. Asterisk, that's the spirit, Diane said, her voice filled with encouragement. Asterisk, you've done the hard part. Now we'll finish this together. You've got this. Asterisk. The conversation ended, but Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling of exhaustion. She had fought so hard, and the idea of starting the battle all over again seemed impossible. But she knew she couldn't stop now. She couldn't let the Coopers wear her down. The next few days were filled with more legal meetings, more paperwork, more waiting. The uncertainty never seemed to go away. But Rebecca was starting to realize that this fight wasn't just about the house. It was about her. She had been living for others for so long, trying to keep her family happy, trying to keep the peace with her in-laws, trying to fit into a world that didn't always see her for who she truly was. But now she was learning how to live for herself. She was learning how to fight for herself. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. The days dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last, but Rebecca kept pushing forward. She found strength in the small things, taking care of the house, working in the garden, even just sitting in the quiet. She was beginning to reconnect with the life she had put on hold for so long. The battle with the Coopers wasn't over, but Rebecca was no longer the woman who had walked into this fight uncertain and broken. She was stronger now. She had learned to stand up for herself, to make decisions that were right for her, and to take back control of her life. It wasn't easy and it wasn't always smooth, but every step she took made her feel a little more at peace. One morning, as Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee and looking out the window at the garden, she realized something. The house, the garden, the memories, they were all part of her journey. But she wasn't defined by them. She wasn't defined by the grief, the legal battles, or the Coopers' manipulations. She was defined by how she chose to move forward. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And that realization gave her the strength to face whatever came next. The Coopers might keep trying, but they would never take away her sense of self, her dignity, or her right to live her life on her own terms. She had fought for everything she had, and she would continue to fight for herself. Rebecca was ready for the next chapter of her life. And this time she was in control. The tension in Rebecca's life didn't ease as quickly as she had hoped. Though the legal battle had reached a decision in her favor, the Coopers were relentless. They hired a new lawyer, someone who seemed determined to drag out the proceedings, throwing new claims and challenges her way. Rebecca was tired of the constant uncertainty, tired of being pulled back into the chaos. It was as if they couldn't accept that they had lost. Each time the phone rang or a letter arrived, Rebecca felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The emotional toll of everything she had endured weighed heavily on her. She had fought for what was hers, but now it felt like it was never going to end. Her days were filled with legal meetings, calls with Diane, and endless paperwork. She was constantly reliving the fight, even when she just wanted to breathe, to grieve, to let go of the past. But she couldn't afford to. The Coopers weren't giving up, and she had to be ready for anything. One evening, as Rebecca sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television, she received another call from Diane. "Rebecca, I have some updates," Diane said, her tone slightly more serious than usual. We've received their appeal documents. They're claiming that the deed was forged. They're trying to discredit the entire process. Rebecca's stomach dropped. What does that mean? She asked, trying to keep the panic from creeping into her voice. It means they're going to try to delay everything even further, Diane explained. They're hoping to tie this up in court for as long as possible. But we have the evidence, Rebecca. You've already won once and you'll win again. We just have to stick to the plan. Rebecca took a deep breath, her hands trembling. She had known this wasn't over, but hearing it again, hearing how much effort the Coopers were putting into breaking her, made her heart ache. She had never expected her family to turn on her like this, especially after John's death. He had always been her protector, the one person who had understood her. Now it felt like his absence left her exposed, vulnerable. "I'm so tired, Diane," Rebecca whispered, her voice cracking slightly. I just want to move on. I want to heal. But it feels like it's never going to end. I know it's hard," Diane said gently. You're stronger than you think. You've already come so far. And you're not alone in this. We'll keep fighting. You'll get the peace you deserve. Just hang in there. Rebecca nodded, even though Diane couldn't see her. "I'm trying," she said quietly. But it's hard. I'm not sure how much more I can take. After the call, Rebecca put her phone down and leaned back on the couch. Her eyes wandered around the living room. The room that had once been filled with laughter, with warmth, with love. Now it felt empty. The house that had been a symbol of everything she had built with John was now the center of this exhausting battle. It wasn't just the house. It was the life she had lost. And every time she thought she was moving forward, something would drag her back, reminding her of everything she had fought for, and everything she had lost. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the flowers John had planted. It was a peaceful sight, and for a moment Rebecca allowed herself to feel that peace. But the moment passed quickly, and the weight of the situation settled back in. She wasn't just fighting for a house. She was fighting for herself. She had spent years taking care of everyone else, making sure her family was happy, making sure everything ran smoothly. Now it was her turn to fight for what she needed. She had to finish what she started. Rebecca's thoughts turned to the Coopers. They hadn't cared about her all those years. They had never truly accepted her into their family. And now they were trying to take what little she had left. The house, the memories, it was all she had to hold on to. And they wanted to take it away from her. But she wouldn't let them. She couldn't. The next few days were a blur of emotions, as Rebecca tried to balance the legal battle with the everyday challenges of life. She went through the motions, work, meetings, phone calls with Diane, focusing on the task at hand, trying to keep her mind from wandering to the emotional toll it was all taking on her. But it was hard. Every time she thought she could take a breath, another hurdle appeared. The Coopers kept pushing. They filed more paperwork, made more claims, and it felt like the weight of it all would crush her. She couldn't seem to escape it. Her life had become a series of legal proceedings and arguments. There was no space to grieve, no space to heal. It felt as though the Coopers were determined to make her pay for something she didn't deserve. The house was supposed to be her sanctuary. But now it was a reminder of everything she was fighting to keep. And the emotional toll it was taking on her was becoming unbearable. Rebecca spent more nights alone, sitting in the quiet of the living room, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. She had won the battle for the house, but the war wasn't over. Every day it felt like a new challenge, a new obstacle, a new twist in the story. And yet, through it all, Rebecca knew one thing for sure. She couldn't give up. She had come too far to let them win. She had fought for what was hers, and she would keep fighting, no matter how exhausting it was. She couldn't allow the Coopers to take everything from her. Not now, not ever. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, staring at the legal documents spread before her. The pages were filled with the words of her lawyer, Diane, detailing the next steps in the ongoing legal battle with the Coopers. But today Rebecca wasn't focused on the papers. Today she was focused on herself. The months of emotional exhaustion, of constant stress and uncertainty, had taken their toll. She had fought for the house, she had stood her ground, but the price of that fight was starting to become clear. Her life, the one she had shared with John, the life she had once thought was stable and secure, had been turned upside down. The Coopers weren't just trying to take her home. They were trying to take everything she had built. They had underestimated her at every turn, and yet they still hadn't given up. Rebecca's thoughts drifted back to the first day the legal battle began. She had never imagined that her grief, her loss, would turn into a fight for something as mundane as property. But it wasn't just about the house. It was about her right to be heard, to be respected, to have control over her own life. She hadn't realized it at the time, but the house had become a symbol of her own self-worth, of her ability to stand up for herself, and now that symbol was at risk. She ran her fingers over the surface of the table, letting the coolness of the wood ground her in the moment. She needed to take a step back to remember why she had fought in the first place. It wasn't for the house, it was for her. For the woman who had spent so many years prioritizing everyone else's needs. It was finally time to prioritize her own. The phone rang, cutting through the silence of the room. It was Diane. Rebecca, we've received their response, Diane said. The Coopers are pushing forward with their appeal. They're not backing down. Rebecca sighed, feeling a familiar knot tighten in her chest. She had expected this. They were stubborn, relentless, and cruel. But she wouldn't let them break her. What does this mean? Rebecca asked, her voice steady despite the rising tension in her chest. It means we keep fighting, Diane replied. We've already won once and we'll win again. They're just trying to delay the inevitable. We're in a strong position, Rebecca. You're not going to lose this. I'm tired of fighting, Rebecca admitted, her voice softer than she intended. I've been through so much. I just want it to end. I just want to live in peace. I know, Diane said sympathetically. But you've come so far. This is your home. This is your life. You've fought for it and you'll keep fighting. You've got this. Rebecca closed her eyes, taking in Diane's words. It wasn't easy, but she had already made it through so much. She had stood up for herself, and that was more than she had ever done before. She wasn't about to let the Coopers take that away from her. You're right, Rebecca said, her resolve returning. I'm not going to let them win. Not now, not ever. As they ended the call, Rebecca felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't about the house anymore, it was about her. It was about taking control of her life, no matter what obstacles came her way. It was about reclaiming the pieces of herself that had been lost along the way. The rest of the day passed in a blur of legal work and research. Rebecca spent hours on the phone with Diane, gathering more information, preparing for the next steps. She couldn't afford to be passive anymore. She had to be active, decisive, and strong. It wasn't just about winning the case. It was about owning her future, her choices, and her right to move forward. By the time night fell, Rebecca felt physically exhausted but mentally stronger. She had faced down the Coopers' manipulations time and time again, and each time she had emerged more determined. She had done everything she could to protect her home, to protect herself, and now she could only wait for the final decision. But that didn't mean she would just sit back and wait. She knew the Coopers would keep fighting, but Rebecca was ready. She wasn't going to let them dictate her life any longer. She had spent years being the one who bent to the will of others, who stayed quiet to avoid confrontation. But that was no longer who she was. She had fought for herself and she had won. She would keep fighting no matter what. The following days were filled with anticipation. Rebecca's mind wandered back to the day she had first found the deed to the house. At that moment, she had realized she wasn't just a widow trying to pick up the pieces of her life. She was a woman who had the right to protect what was hers. The Coopers could take nothing from her that she wasn't willing to fight for. The legal battle continued, but Rebecca felt more and more confident in her position. She had made it through the worst of it, and no matter how long it took, she would continue to stand her ground. She wasn't just fighting for a house. She was fighting for her place in the world, for her right to live without fear or guilt. One afternoon, Rebecca sat in the quiet of her living room, looking out the window at the world outside. She had been through so much, but as the sun began to set, she realized that the fight had changed her. It wasn't just the house that she had reclaimed, it was her life. She had fought for herself, and she had found strength she didn't know she had. It wasn't easy, but she had done it. She had won. And now it was time for her to move on. The future was still uncertain, but Rebecca had learned one important thing. She had the power to shape her own destiny. She wasn't going to let the past define her. She wasn't going to let the Coopers or anyone else take that power away. The house was hers, and so was her future.